I'm Curious Cass, and this is Curiosity Junkie. Today's guest is a journalist and the author of Your Psilocybin Mushroom Companion, the down-to-earth guide that details everything you need to know about taking magic mushrooms safely and mindfully. Please welcome Michelle Janikian.
Hi, Michelle Janikian. Welcome to Curiosity Junkie Podcast.
Hi, Cass. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Yes, me too. Like I was saying earlier, I know very little about mushrooms or psychedelics in general, so I am super excited to have you on and learn a little bit more about safe ways to use them. I have done mushrooms in my early 20s, did them one time with a girlfriend. It was an amazing experience in that it was very colorful. Everything that moved had like trails of color behind it. That was the only time I ever did it. So I want to learn a little bit more because I'm thinking about having an experience more on a spiritual level than just like a party drug kind of experience. So first, let's talk about how you got to being an author and a writer. You write for some pretty cool publications. So let's talk a little bit about that first.
Yeah, sure. Currently I write for Playboy, which is the big one. Double Blind Mag is a new women-run psychedelics mag, really cool. Psychedelics Today is this podcast that's really great, interviews a lot of experts, and I work on their blog and some other stuff. But yeah, how did I become a psychedelic journalist? That's a good question. I've always wanted to be a writer since I was a little kid. I didn't really know what form that would take or if that would even be possible. It's like, kind of like a pipe dream to want to become a writer and, you have to like go on and do more normal things, but not me, as a teen, I was really into like counterculture literature and stuff, like reading the Beats and, anything from the 60s. And that has a lot to do with drugs and psychedelics, like once you get deep into it. And that really evolved how people were thinking and really opened their minds. And that was like always so fascinating to me and so like philosophical. I was like a 17-year-old. I was really into it. I ended up going to Sarah Lawrence College to study writing, but was like so intimidated by all my writing workshops. I was like, oh man, I could never do this. Everyone's so good. I should just quit right now. I started studying psychology because I was like, well, maybe this I can understand. But yeah, and now I'm in my early 30s. It's been a bit of a journey. What really kicked off my writing career is actually I had a friend die of an overdose about 7 years ago, and was really the big impact for me, more so than some strong psychedelic experience. It was losing this really close friend and feeling kind of responsible, even though I wasn't there when it happened or anything. It just really hit me really hard. It still does. And I moved to Mexico to like clear my head and to try to figure things out. And that's when it kind of opened up this space to start writing professionally and to really promote like safe use and like harm reduction in my work, because people are going to continue to use substances. We can't really stop them. Criminalizing it or stigmatizing it doesn't work. It doesn't prevent people from easing their pain, self-medicating, curiosity. Like, I'm not really one of these people who thinks that those are all bad things. I'm really trying out. So a big part of my goal is to destigmatize drug use and especially safe use and to get that info out there to people. And I've been reporting on this stuff for about 5 years. I started a lot in the cannabis and CBD space. So yeah, I have a lot to talk about there as well. But in the past 2 or 3 years, there's just been a lot of interest from my editors and people I work with in psychedelics. And I literally had my old editor from Playboy write me an email like 3 or 4 years ago. And she was like, Michelle, do you have experience with other drugs? And I was like, actually, I'm glad you asked. And so I finally had opportunities to start exploring other substances in my work and promoting safe use for all things. Because like cannabis and psychedelics are like an easy place to start. People are really open-minded lately to these things, but my goal is really to keep covering all substances, to really promote safe use for all drugs. Decriminalize all drugs is a big part of my platform. And then, yeah, I wrote this book recently. A year ago, it came out, Your Psilocybin Mushroom Companion. It's a guide on how to use mushrooms in a safe and intentional way. And that's my story in a nutshell.
Love it. Love it. Yes, and I came across your book, and I can't remember. I think I found you through another podcast. I was listening, and I thought I need to talk to this gal because you were talking about the mushrooms and your book, and I was like, I need to get her book because I want to have an experience, but I want it to be safe, and I don't, I want to do it the right way. And so let's talk a little bit about that in
Sure.
that we know people are doing it and people can't overdose or have a bad experience. And that's part of what your book is about, how to do it the right way. So I'd love to kind of get into what is the right way.
Yeah, well, I actually as someone who's really into destigmatizing safe use, I don't really love terms like right and wrong way, but I know why they're necessary, right? Because safe, I feel like for me, safe is the only right way. And so what is a safe way to use mushrooms, right? Because actually it's pretty hard to overdose on mushrooms. There's no cases. You need to take your freaking body weight in shrooms to overdose. But a bad trip is totally possible, or just a challenging trip that you don't know how to deal with is actually what's going on, right? And just dosing and all these things. So some safe use basics for mushrooms include, taking a safe beginner dose. So I think that when you're using mushrooms with friends or you buy them from someone and it's more in this druggy culture, you buy a bag, it's usually 3.5 grams, the whole eighth, and they tell you to eat the whole thing and it'll get you there and you'll have a full trip. But as someone who did that for the first time at a young age, I think it's a bit too strong. If you don't have any psychedelic experience, if you're not really fully prepared, that's going to be pretty overwhelming. And for a lot of people, it's this pretty crazy thing that they're just shove under the rug and never want to approach again. And just kind of help people with that, I recommend in the book starting at a pretty low dose. Maybe you want to even start with a micro dose and then you work your way up. But yeah, so dose is a really important part of safe use. You want to take a safe dose. And I recommend in the book maybe starting somewhere under 2 grams of dried Psilocybin cubensis is a safe place. And then you also want to prepare yourself and your surroundings. And so, preparing, so we call that set and setting in the psychedelic community.
Okay.
And that really means where your mindset is at and your physical and social environment. So I recommend folks really give it a lot of thought. And I have a lot of suggestions in the book on, how to prepare yourself, learning what to expect and how to relax and ground yourself. And, just it's mostly about breathing deeply, reminding yourself everything's going to be okay. And then you want to prepare a really safe and comfortable situation. So someone stressed out or overwhelmed because there's a lot of people coming and going, things like that are just a recipe for a bad trip. And so, I recommend folks maybe stay home or find a nice, safe outdoor location. And if you want it to be a little bit more spiritual, there are some things you can do set intentions or build an altar or just, prepare a spiritual looking environment because you're really susceptible to your environment. It really influences you a lot. So if you make a really pretty kind of spiritual situation, you'll probably have a kind of pretty spiritual trip. It's just how it works. It's very much about what your expectations are and what you're looking for. That really affects how the journey turns out. There's lots of other safe use stuff in there. If you have any particular questions, I'm very open to answering them. But
I think just a friend and I are wanting to do the experience more in a spiritual mindset and kind of opening up to just all things, being more open. And so our theory is we're going to do it at home and together and small dose, not big dose, because neither one of us have really done it. And so we're really just starting small. I do have your book coming. It's, I think, supposed to arrive tomorrow or, I think it's coming Saturday. So I'm excited to get it and kind of read through that. I really want to educate myself before going into that. experience. And I think everyone should do the research on the psychedelic experience before stepping into it. I mean, I didn't at 20, but
and a lot of people don't. And I think that's like a lot of why you have these like really overwhelming, crazy trips at first, because you have no idea what to expect. And so, yeah, to prepare yourself definitely helps. Although I would also say at the same time, it's kind of like almost like the opposite, but like going in without a lot of expectations is also a pretty healthy way to do it. So it's kind of hard. You want to prepare, but not set too many expectations for yourself.
Right.
But to just go in with an open mind, I think the key is to just go in accepting whatever comes up. So even if you and your friend like get uncomfortable and it's like, oh, why do people do this? Do I even like this? To just like accept it, instead of like fight it the whole time and be like, God, when is this over? And like checking the clock. It's just like about just like accepting it, breathing through it, knowing that it can make you nauseous, knowing that it can make you sad. It makes me cry often a lot, but in a good way. I realize things I wasn't seeing. I get a bit of catharsis. And then when I come out of it, if that thing that was making me cry was like about shame or something that embarrasses me, like I can make changes, I don't have to like keep doing that same thing and keep actually feeling this underlying embarrassment or shame. Like I can be a little bit more proactive. And I think that's why I really love mushrooms. They give me this new perspective on all sorts of little details of my life that I can then go in and make some changes if I need after the fact, in between trips in the, real world.
Right, absolutely. So if someone's going to go into this and use it maybe as a way to kind of get more connected to themselves and pay attention to things that come up during the experience, how often would you say it's safe to do this?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by safe. If you mean physically, like it's physically safe to do it all the time. But I mean, I think personally what I tell folks is like, I don't use psychedelics more than like or mushrooms, I don't take more than like quarterly or maybe like 3 times a year, because it is a pretty deep experience. A lot can come up and I need that time in between to really like process all that. We call it integration in the psychedelic community, but I need time to integrate the material, figure out what it means, figure out if I need to make any changes. What does it mean for the rest of my life? What does it mean for tomorrow? Things like that. So yeah, I recommend like quarterly to keep yourself grounded and to give yourself time to, really figure out what your trip meant before going into another one.
Right. No, I love that. That's great advice. One of the things that came up in some conversations with people when I said I was going to be speaking with you was an allergy aspect. One young lady asked me, she has some food allergies, and she said, if someone is allergic to mushrooms in general, she's not, but if they were, is this the same kind of mushroom? Like how would you know? Or is that a concern?
That's interesting. I've never gotten that question. I'm not a doctor, but I would say if you're allergic to mushrooms, these count as mushrooms and you will probably be allergic to these too, unfortunately. So then this might not be an option. But there are other medicines, psychedelic medicines, that would maybe be a better option for you. There are some people, so mushrooms cell walls are different than plant cell walls. They're made of chitin instead of cellulose. And chitin is like a bit harder to digest. And we often take psilocybin mushrooms raw, and you never really eat raw mushrooms because they upset your stomach, because it's harder for us to digest chitin, and some people don't have the enzyme to digest it. It's called like chitinase or something like. And so that could be a concern. That's like why some people get a little bit more nauseous and makes them feel a little more sick than others. So but some things you can do to help mitigate that is you can make your mushrooms into a tea with hot water, and that begins to break down the cell wall and like cooks the mushroom essentially a little bit. So you could make a tea. If you're more like sensitive to mushrooms, if you were straight up allergic to them, this won't affect your allergy. But if it makes you really nauseous and you're really uncomfortable most of the time, making it into a tea or cooking them a little first can actually help you digest them, and it won't affect the potency. A lot of people think that, but you need to cook it for a long time on a really high heat or something for it to kill the psilocybin
Okay.
So yeah, that's an option. But yeah, if you're allergic to mushrooms, you're gonna be allergic to psilocybin containing ones
Right.
too,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Okay. What about like the chemical brain reaction, the experience that's happening? What's the science behind that? Is there science behind it?
Yeah, so researchers are still figuring it out, but I learned a lot when I was researching my book of what they have kind of sorted through. And one of the really interesting findings, I think, is that so mushrooms and a lot of psychedelics can quiet your default mode network. And so this is a part of the brain that actually, when you ask someone to like just sit and relax and do nothing in like an fMRI or something, this is the part of the brain that lights up, because this is the part that is like future planning and self-referential thinking. It's like, and they say that people with anxiety and OCD and addiction have overactive default mode networks because they're like maybe always planning or something like that, and it's just like a little too intense, right? And so what mushrooms do is they quiet that system. And actually, if you look at a brain scan of someone who's under the influence of psilocybin versus not, their brains are like making all these new connections that they never make. Like all these other parts of the brain are talking to each other that don't typically do. And that's really interesting. And that's probably why you get these insights and see things from a new perspective, because you have like new parts of the brain talking to each other that don't normally do. And also like, a really cool thing about how mushrooms can help people like out of ruts or feel like a reset is because oftentimes our sober brains are like, if you look at that same brain scan, we're making the same connections every day. And that's like typical. We have routine species, we're doing the kind of same. We eat breakfast, we have coffee, da 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 da. And so, yeah, like the default mode network or like how your brain works typically can almost work against you, because we're thinking all these things, but they could be negative, right? Like you're not good enough, you shouldn't even try. So a cool thing about mushrooms is when they turn that system down or off, if you take a really high dose, you can just see things from a new perspective. You can see beyond your depression or things like that. And that's really powerful for people. They come back feeling really reset and just ready to, take what's the expression, the bull by the horns or something, of their lives, and that's a really, I think, magical and beautiful part of how mushrooms work.
And I think that's the important piece that I know with a lot of drugs, the stigmatism around it is like when Reefer Madness came out back in the day, and it was how bad it was for you, and it was going to make you crazy and all of that. And I know a lot of the psychedelics have gotten that same stigma attached to them. And when I was talking to my son, he said, what are the laws? What are some of the things that someone could do to kind of help bring this to more of a legalized drug?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. In the 80s, there was all these commercials that like psychedelics will kill your brain cells, right?
Exactly.
But now there's all this research coming out in rat models and stuff that they actually support neurogenesis. It's the opposite. It's amazing. So what you can do to get involved, so there's a lot of local initiatives around the US called Decriminalize Nature, and you can get involved or you can start one in your city. And these are the groups that are decriminalizing psilocybin and other plant medicines around the country. Like it just happened in Oregon, they just decriminalized for the whole state. That's actually a different initiative. But so what you can do is you can either volunteer to like gather signatures and be part of these programs, or if there's no initiative in your city, you can start one. You can go to decriminalizenature.org to figure out like how to do that. But it's mostly like some of the most successful initiatives are just going to City Hall and getting it changed, just in your city, showing the evidence, the scientific evidence that, these laws aren't based on science, they're based on stigma. And so definitely, look into Decriminalize Nature. There's a lot of great initiatives popping up around the US, and hopefully we can change it federally eventually, just like cannabis. If enough states, legalize, then I think mushrooms are definitely going down the same path. And I think it's going to be even quicker than what happened with cannabis. It's happening pretty fast. So it's exciting.
Yeah. Somebody said the other day, we were talking, I think, about cannabis, and they said, how is it that they can criminalize something that comes from nature, that can be grown anywhere? Like, how can they even do that? But they do, and it's all based in fear. People become afraid, and they're told and conditioned that this is a bad thing, and then it just goes from there.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. Yeah. And it's a really exciting time to be alive that it is slowly changing, and hopefully with all of these legalization and decriminalization initiatives that we'll be able to grow our own medicine. It's not included in all of them. So if you are looking to get involved, make sure you push for home grow, because it's really important. It's how all of this is going to be the most accessible for everyone. And mushrooms and weed are actually pretty straightforward to grow yourself. So once they're legal, there'll be lots of, I think people should really look into it.
Yes. I know my son started testing growing mushrooms for restaurants and
cool.
that kind of thing. And he had some pretty good success with it. And so I think he's just curious, like, how far away are we from making that like a legalized opportunity? But
can you imagine like gourmet psilocybin dinners or something?
Yes, right? Would that be fun? I'm like, yes.
Yeah, and definitely, and like a microdose too. People like it for socializing as like an alcohol replacement. It's a very subtle, kind of heart-opening experience, and very, very, very like sub-perceptual doses. I could see that being kind of cool.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that would be an interesting concept. Well, let's talk a little bit about how people can connect with you and get a copy of your book, because I know I have a copy of it coming, and I'm very excited to dig into it and learn more about mushrooms. So let's share that with everybody.
Yes, sure. So my book's available on, all major booksellers. So you can order it on Amazon, or you can support a local bookstore. If they don't carry it in the shop, you can ask them to order you a copy. You can do that on indiebound.org too. So that's like an easy way to support a local bookstore, which I'm really big on. You can find me I'm really active on Instagram at Michelle.Janikian. I also have a website, MichelleJanikian.com, and I keep that really updated with my articles, podcasts. I'm going to soon start selling my book up there too, sometimes little limited batches. So if you want to support me directly, you can soon buy the book on my website.
So when you were doing a lot of your research for the book, who were some of your go-to experts when you're doing your research?
Yeah, so for the book, I interviewed about like 7 to 10 like mushroom psychedelic experts. And I also interviewed about 20 mushroom users just to like get a feel for, what regular people are doing at home. But my go-to experts, the scientists at Johns Hopkins University are doing a lot of really interesting psychedelic research, and I interviewed one of their longest standing researchers, Bill Richards, for the book. He's a really nice psychologist who's been doing this work for decades. Like, he was one of the psychologists working with mushrooms back in the 70s before like all that work got shut down basically by the government. Who else? I tried to interview as many like women experts as I can to try to diversify the psychedelic expert pool. So I interviewed Elizabeth Nielsen. She's a PhD psychedelic integration specialist. So she started and does a lot of training for other therapists on how to work with people who want to explore their psychedelic experience. She gave me a lot of useful tips for my integration chapter. Also, what is it called? A
naturopath or a holistic?
Naturopath, yeah, exactly. I'm so bad. I forgot that word. But Dr. Erica Zelfand, she also really helped me. She's a naturopath in Oregon, I'm pretty sure, who knows a lot about integration and how they work. Who else? Yeah, I'm always talking to people. Microdose article I wrote. But I mean, yeah, there's a lot of experts out there now, a lot of really accessible psychedelic scientists who are, open to exploring this stuff with writers and journalists. So I'm always looking for new experts as well. But
because you said something about like working with a psychologist, that one of your experts kind of works with psychologists who work with their patients. I think, wow, what a great tool to use with someone. Is that something you've experienced, or?
So not me personally. I can't really afford therapy on a freelance writer's salary, but if I'm being really honest, I wish. I think that's great. But a lot of folks are. So what's a really cool thing I don't think everyone knows is that, like, yes, there's psilocybin assisted therapy, and that's soon going to be legal. It is legal in Oregon, but it won't be up and running for 2 years. But there's these like clinical trials you can do, like that's the whole thing. But there's also a whole more accessible path to this work where you can just work with a psychedelic integration therapist or counselor or coach. Now, they can't give you any psychedelic medicine, so you don't ask them. But what they can do is if you go do a trip on your own or you go to a retreat center somewhere, they're going to be open to talking about it with you and processing it. So you don't have to be all weird and lie about it, because they're not going to like re-stigmatize you. They're not going to judge you. Like a lot of therapists will. Like there are therapists who will stop seeing you if you tell them you use cannabis, like it's a pretty stigmatized area in mental health. But there are some trained therapists who are working in this field. And so you can reach out to them. They prefer that you reach out to them before you have a psychedelic experience. So then you can prepare together, all this kind of thing we were talking about earlier. And then you go into the experience on your own, hopefully with a trip sitter, like a family member or something who can watch you while you're having it. And then they're there for you to integrate together. They'll make meaning, help you figure out if there's any changes you need to make. And it's a really cool process that is, accessible to anyone who can, afford it, has health insurance. And a lot of these therapists do teletherapy now with COVID and everything. So even if you don't live in a big city, you could probably still find access to one of these therapists. And I think that's a really cool, I do want to do that kind of work eventually. I think it's really, really powerful for folks, really helping them get the most out of these experiences. If that's what you're looking, especially if you're looking, to psychedelics for mental health, instead of just like curiosity or self-exploration. If you are someone with like clinical depression or something, it can definitely help the whole process. Yeah,
I do think that would be quite the experience, like you said, because it would help you process everything that you experienced on that trip. So instead of trying to figure it out by yourself.
But talking things out helps. So if you can't afford a therapist, there are also support groups, psychedelic integration circles. You could go and just like share in a peer circle. And some of those are free. Some of them are really affordable. And they're mostly online right now because of the pandemic. So that's another option to just get some perspective. I also recommend journaling in my book and just in general. I think that's a really kind of, least you can do thing to maximize the benefits of your experience. You can write about, I suggest starting before your experience, journaling about your expectations, your fears, how you're feeling, what you're looking for. And then you don't really have to do too much journaling during, but like the day after or the night after. And to continue to read those entries and to explore them and what they mean to you, it can be a really powerful way to do this work on your own and to make meaning for yourself instead of, looking to someone else to make it for you.
Right. No, great advice. Really. And I love journaling, and I think that would be a great way to kind of go into it. So
you could start like your own like little just like separate psychedelic journal. It'll like motivate you to do it too. Buy a really pretty one, and to just use it for your journey work. I think that could be a really powerful tool. Yeah. That's what I do.
I love it. That's a great idea. What other drugs do you want to see legalized in that they've been stigmatized as bad, but you see them as having healing potential?
They're, like all psychedelics could be legalized in that way, like MDMA and ayahuasca, LSD, ketamine. But I think all drugs should be decriminalized, whether or not we think they have any kind of benefits. And I also kind of think that once we start talking about this kind of like drug exceptionalism, like, I don't know, it makes me a little uncomfortable. Like, and I think people will just use that to justify their drug use. Well, I use MDMA because it's good for you, and you use cocaine, like you're a bad person. Like, that just perpetuates more stigma and just like keeps putting people in jail, and just all the drug wars just doesn't benefit anyone. So I think all drugs should be legalized completely, but at least decriminalized to start. And then whether or not some of them are used in conjunction with therapy or help people, like, that's really subjective to the person. You know, maybe, you know, opioids help some people, you know, things like that. We shouldn't just across the board say these are bad, no one should use them. But I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of exciting things with psychedelic assisted therapy in the US in coming years, with especially psilocybin and MDMA for different uses. But like I said, I want all drugs legal.
Yeah. Well, you think about it, like alcohol back in the day when they tried prohibition, and
Didn't
people
work.
still found a way to get to it. And that's exactly how it is with drugs. It just becomes, I hate to say bad, but done in a devious way, maybe.
Well, exactly. Yeah. More
Out in
people
the
get
open.
hurt. Exactly. More people use it in secret, so they're not being open with their friends and family, and then they're mixing substances, and then they can really get hurt. Also, if drugs are legalized and regulated, then we won't be buying drugs that are sold as one thing and actually another. Because another key harm reduction thing, especially if you're using things like LSD and MDMA, is to test your substances for purity, because there could be fentanyl and more dangerous substances mixed in there that you don't want to be taking. And so if they're legalized, you know, overdose and things like that will be reduced dramatically, because people will be able to buy, like we can buy THC in California now, you know, it's exactly 2.5 milligrams. It has this much ratio of CBD, da, 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 da. That's what I want to see with all drugs. That's the safest way to move forward, I think.
Yes. Great. That's fantastic. Love it. So what, you know, as we're wrapping up here, what do you like to share? What's the one thing you want people to, maybe even just from your book, come away with? Or if someone's thinking about doing an experience with psychedelics, what would you leave them with?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, I think, you know, prepare yourself for this stuff. It isn't something to take super lightly, even though I'm talking about it in this way. It is a pretty powerful and serious thing that you're about to embark on. So prepare your mind, your body, your environment. Take it all seriously, and you will have a more powerful experience. It's all about, yeah, like I say, it's all about expectation, even though I don't want you to have a lot of expectations going in. But if you frame it in this way that you're about to have a powerful or spiritual type experience, it will become a more powerful or spiritual experience. It's just this weird thing.
Yes.
And so take it all seriously. Don't take it spontaneously. You know, don't do it because everyone's doing it and the media's talking about it all the time. You got to really feel it. Like, this is something you feel deeply curious or passionate about. And then I think, yeah, just do it in a safe and responsible way, and you can have a really powerful experience.
Yeah, great advice. Love, love, love. Hey, I also forgot, I was thinking earlier, when we were talking about getting into it, do you feel like there's an age that is more appropriate for a first time experience?
That's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of us tried as late teens and early 20s, and we're probably not ready, honestly. We're still like figuring out who we are, and to put this really powerful psychedelic medicine on top of that, I mean, it can help, but it can also, I think, just be a little destabilizing. So I think it's actually better, like, you know, they say your personality doesn't change too much after the age of 30, more or less. So I think once you hit that age and I think that's like or further to however old, they're actually quite safe to use for any age. You know, I mean, like if you're 70, I think it's still quite safe. Like, go for it. Like 80, like yes. But like, yeah, I think it's actually best for adults with kind of like fully formed sense of themselves to then go into it, and to see that fully formed sense from a new point of view can be really powerful. But when you're still figuring yourself out in 17, 21, you know, I don't know. I don't think it's as necessary.
Right. It's a little more enlightening as we're older.
Yeah, not to say that you shouldn't as a young person, but I mean, not too young. Yeah, I mean, we all did and we're fine, right?
Right.
And it can be like a rite of passage. It can be really powerful, you know. I think if it became legal in America and we have these clinical setups or retreat centers, you could go as an 18-year-old with your whole family and do a ceremony to welcome you to adulthood or something. That could be a really beautiful way to, I think, keep kids like not only like, you know, a rite of passage, but like to realize just how important they are and special. And, you know, as a young person, I think I used drugs really frivolously, and I got myself into some risky and dangerous situations because I didn't realize my own mortality, you know. And I think that that's one thing mushrooms can teach you. Like, you know, you don't need to binge drink. You're a very important person and your life matters and everyone's does. And it's also quite fragile. And, you know, don't waste it. I think those are lessons that are, you know, very common with psychedelics that could be really beneficial to a younger person. But we just don't have the cultural framework yet for all that. But I think we're moving in that direction. And I really hope that this won't be like off limits to anyone under a certain age, that it's more like, well, if you have the right support system and stuff, that this could be really beneficial.
Yeah, I love the thought of that. What a beautiful experience that would be. Whole family, even like bringing everyone together.
Yeah, reconnecting. Like instead of like that's can be a time where you're all like so spread out and just be, you know, but to really like connect as a family unit like that could be really powerful.
Yes,
Definitely.
what a beautiful thought. Hey, I'm thinking that's like a perfect place to end because it's beautiful.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for coming on and educating me. And hopefully the audience is going to take something away from this conversation. Again, I will put how to connect with you, how to purchase your book, and all of the descriptions for the podcast and the YouTube channel. And again, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure. I love this stuff. I love the opportunity to share with a new audience. So thanks again.
No, I appreciate you taking the time. And for everybody out there, thank you so much for tuning in, listening, watching. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you next week.